Hey everyone, I'm Breanna from Boom, and welcome to Boom Chat. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Christopher Cantwell, the writer that's bringing you regarding the matter of Oswald's body. The Kennedy assassination is a rat's nest of conspiracy theories. You've got mafia involvement, the second gunman, the government cover-up, but the most important chapter of this sordid tale may just be the theory that the body buried at Oswald's Rose Hill gravesite is not actually Lee Harvey himself. Let's meet the ragtag group of useful idiots, a wannabe cowboy from Wisconsin, a Buddy Holly-idolizing former car thief, a world-weary civil rights activist ready for revolution, and a failed G-man who still acts the part, who are all unwittingly brought together to clean up the crime of the century and specifically deal with the matter of Oswald's body. Okay, Chris. The subject matter of this story is got to be literally one of America's most controversial conspiracy theories. Could be a bit sensitive for some people, but I really want to know what intrigued you so much about this project that you just had to put pen to paper.
Well, I grew up in Dallas, Texas. And so I think as a little kid, when you find out in grade school, eventually, as we all do, that President Kennedy was killed, and then, that alone is very shocking, I think, as a kid to realize that can happen. And then there's the added layer where I realized it happened kind of down the street like that. And when we would get on the certain freeways, you pass by that area and it's very spooky. And it was something that stuck with me, forever, I guess. And my parents were also people who, they took me to movies a lot. It was a thing that we did almost every weekend. We saw movies every weekend, and they were also not super careful about what movies we saw. It was just like my dad would pick something in the newspaper and then we would just go see it. He would not do a lot of research. And so that's how I ended up seeing the movie JFK by Oliver Stone when I was maybe 9 years old, which was intense, right? I mean, I think my dad thought it was a biopic and was like, oh, they probably touched on the assassination and, it's a pretty intense movie, especially I would never show. I have an 8-year-old now, and it's like, what were my parents thinking? Like, it's traumatizing. That said, it's a very good movie. I think that the argument it makes is compelling in a cinematic standpoint. I don't think that movie really holds a candle to any kind of empirical truth, which I think is something that's fascinating because it did at that time convince so many more people that there was more to the story. And it even convinced my dad. I mean, I remember driving home, from the movie theater, and he was telling my mom, like, oh my God, like they killed him, referring like they was the government, he was like a normal, 40 something baby boomer guy, in the suburbs. So that kind of compelling narrative that can obfuscate and examine the truth of events and examine the pockets of mysteries and unknowns that come in a story like that or in an event like that. I mean, that intrigued me for the rest of my life. And I ended up I've read way too much about the Kennedy assassination, like way too much. And ultimately there are things that go into that event, given the time it happened, right, which was the media recording, and I mean like audio and visual, and newspaper reporting and the timeliness of reporting weren't where they are now, right? It wasn't 24/7 immediate. There was also the bureaucratic oversight of what needed to be accomplished by things like the Warren Commission report, which was like, we need to make sure we don't ruffle the feathers of the Soviet Union, who a year ago, we were almost shooting missiles at each other. All of these things, there were a lot of agendas that were competing. There was a lot of negligence and mismanagement. So all of those things create these pockets of unknowns that people can endlessly explore for, the rest of their natural lives. And the fact is, we'll never know every single minute, every single second of what happened, even though we can get pretty close. You just can't go back and re-examine it the way you can other things that are more recent. So I think that, and I think that the psychic kind of scar on the national consciousness, it's just something that I think is ripe to be explored. And I've done it before in dramatic storytelling. I wrote a script with my writing partner on the TV side We did a feature about 10 years ago that ended up on the blacklist about the Kennedy assassination. So I haven't come back to it since then, but I had been recently reading about how the true thing that happens in the book is that in 1981, in October, they actually did exhume Oswald from his gravesite in Fort Worth to prove it was him. And you know, they took him to the same hospital he died at, and the same hospital that Kennedy died at. And they said within a day, they said, yeah, it's him. And of course, that satisfied no one. And I think that to me hits at the crux of what's so interesting about conspiracy theories is they'll just continue no matter what. Even if we had, you know, every second laid out in HD footage of what happened from every angle, people would still pull it apart and come up with their own stories. I think our need to assign drama and meaning to something that can be so catastrophic and chaotic, it speaks more to us than any kind of actual external event. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, Chris, you're so good. You totally just answered my second question for me, because
Yes.
I was going to ask you, so how much of what we read in the series is fact and how much is fiction, and how much research did you do beforehand? And you just gave me all of that. Like, you knew. Like, are you psychic? Like, what's going on here?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to need like the lotto numbers for the.
No problem. Yeah, I can. I'll send those to you over email offline though, because
Awesome.
they're just for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. You don't want to split those winnings.
No, I really do not want to do that. I appreciate you. Okay, so then we got our research question answered. So I'm going to jump into the character question. So this group is just a bunch of ragtag misfits that get brought together by Frank, who like is really suspicious, by the way, after just reading number one. I don't know if I trust this man. They're all super distinctive. They've got different personalities. Their designs are really, really, each person is just like a different character. Like, obviously they're all different characters, but they're very specific. And so I wanted to know, did you and Luca, the artist, work together on creating them? And if so, what were some of the influences in why you picked the characters to be the way that they are and have the background that they did? And then I will ask a third question, because that two in a row is too many.
Yeah, you know, I would say that, you know, Luca has every bit of a hand in the creation of the characters that I do. I you know, he's my co-creator on this book, and we've done this thing together. And what he brought to it was this really wonderful kind of pulpy fringe world style to the book that spoke to the Texas elements, to the underworld elements, to the kind of shadow government elements. And I think that art really helped build out and bring to life, you know, what I had put down on paper for him to check out. You know, for me though, when crafting those characters, I wanted to build out an ensemble, just because I do love ensemble pieces, and but I wanted to also give a snapshot that was bigger than maybe what we've historically seen in stories, you know, around this time. In the past, you know, so I just talked about JFK, the Oliver Stone movie. It's a very specific perspective about who's encountering, you know, these different elements around the assassination. And you look even like a movie like Parkland, it's very similar, right? And so I have always been interested in the ground level, you know, experience of something like this, and what that would be like when you don't have access to the information, you don't have access to, you know, the people at the top, right? It's not a top-down story. It's really like it's kind of like a bottom-up story for sure, because even in Texas, these characters are on the fringe a little bit, right? You know, you have a guy who is a cowboy, but you find out that he wants to be a cowboy. He's from Wisconsin. He's leaving another life behind. These people are kind of trying to reinvent themselves. One is a car thief that you mentioned. You know, he's a Latinx, you know, former car thief whose parents are from Laredo, but he's also in love with, you know, the music of Buddy Holly and the Crickets, and the day the music died, that had like a huge effect on him, right? And he's young too. He's like 19, you know, and I built out a kid who's from a very wealthy part of Dallas that I'm familiar with called Highland Park. And he wanted nothing more than to kind of satisfy his kind of very Texas conservative father, you know, be a part of the government, be a part of the machine, you know, but he's also closeted homosexual, right? So that there's a lot of ostracization around that, for that character. And then, South Dallas is a huge community, and I did some research for this book. I read a book called Dallas 1963, which is about Martin Luther King coming to Dallas in early 1963 and how hard that was for the civil rights organizers to put that together and get him there. And then what kind of backlash there was in the community around that, because it was Texas, it was 1963, it was the Deep South. So the last character, Rose, is a civil rights organizer, but she's also trying to get by in South Dallas. So she happens to be really good at check forgery and other things. These people kind of all have to cut corners in their life just to survive, like many of us do who aren't on the very top. So they're all thrust together, and this character Frank finds these pressure points that he can lean on for them to and exploit to get them to do what he wants them to do. And it just felt like a wider and richer picture of that region at that time, right? I want to try to capture that as much as possible, and then also give them very disparate perspectives that could run into each other when they have to work together, because these are people that normally wouldn't associate with each other at all, and then all of a sudden they're like in a car staking someone out for 12 hours a day, and they have to figure out what to do. So that to me was very fun as well.
That's awesome. So you're telling me none of them are based on anybody who might have actually been connected to the real K? Okay.
No, not those four. Yeah, those four are completely fictional, inventions. And there are other characters in the book that are, obviously Oswald is a character in the book. So he's real, and then there are, Jack Ruby shows up, there are amalgamations of other people. There are kind of hints towards other historical figures that may or may not have been in Dallas at the time, who have been rumored to have been involved if there were a conspiracy around the assassination. And, even down to their names, Frank's name is a reference to somebody, and a few people actually that may or may not have existed or been involved in something like this. There's a character named Lou who is is referencing somebody else. I would just direct people to pay a lot of attention to the design pages in the back matter that are usually before and after the issues. I bury a lot of clues and try to flesh out a lot of the surrounding conspiracy stuff around the actual story around our four. That's where I got to put all of my kind of trivia and research into that stuff. And some of that stuff, I pulled real pages out of the Warren Commission, which is public domain. So there's some really fun stuff in there. There's some really fun stuff in there, like the Warren Commission. Yeah.
But I mean, there are history buffs that will absolutely get a kick out of this, and seeing how detailed and granular you got. I'm just sitting here oh my God, you've done an exorbitant amount of research on this, which makes it even more interesting. And I'm so excited for people to pick this up and read it, because I'm still just I'm learning more, and not necessarily taking it as truth, but it's but what if? This is so cool. Okay, so the story itself revolves around the main mystery of whether the body buried in the grave is actually Lee Harvey Oswald himself, and the plan that went into pulling off the what they are planning on doing, whatever that may be. I don't want to give anything away. And so, without you giving too much away, can we expect to get any answers in this universe of his body?
Yes, I mean, for sure. It's over the 5 issues. It's full kind of pull curtain back on the inside of what might have happened, right? And I will say that the tone isn't overtly serious. I think if anything, it's more of a left field kind of offbeat tone. It is a lot of it's characters who are in a lot of ways in their lives screw ups, being tasked with dealing with something that is extremely sensitive and very important, and they're picked for a reason, right? It's a little bit of a Dirty Dozen story in a way, right? And so and the same might be true of Oswald, but it really is like a narrative that's crafted around events that we all know happened over those 48 hours, and then again in 1981 when they dug him up, checked him out of the hospital and put him back. It's all plays off of the autopsy reports of the time, the autopsy reports from 81, all of those things, the different sightings of Oswald around the country and in Mexico, in the months leading up to the assassination. I really tried to build off of all of those things. So, but yeah, I mean, this is this is really a character story that it's these people experience of something that is a national crisis and just a crazy chaotic event that's happening and unfolding in real time, and they just end up being caught up in it. So it's really like, how much agency do they even have in terms of what's happening? They're kind of just swept up with everything that's going on. That's so crazy.
I'm so excited to find out what happens. And I want to ask you, Chris, between us, what do you think actually happened to Oswald's body?
I will say, after reading so much over the last few years, and then and then I did additional research for the script I wrote 10 years ago, and then more research for this. I've read pretty much everything that's out there. I do think it. Here's the thing. I think it was one guy who was very troubled and was upset that he was not as special as he wanted to be. I think you can see that pattern in that guy's life. And he tried to do something about it, and it worked. And I think that against all odds, he did something absolutely world-changing. It changed things forever. And I almost think it was almost an accident in terms of how little planning went into what he did. And I think that truth is so difficult for people to wrap their heads around, because it is so astounding that something like that can happen, that our whole systems of government and our systems of society and our culture, the identity of the country, all of that stuff can be changed by just like one dude, who has a bad day. It's terrifying. It's I would say, I think on a psychological level, exponentially more terrifying than some vast puppet strings, the CIA, the FBI, this, because if you peel all that away, what you're still looking at is, even if it's a mistrust, it is still some sort of acquiescence to an authority, right? Like it's like, those huge power structures above us, they're real, and they're institutions, and they guide our lives, and we're safe, and everything's cool. And even if they do sinister things, they're in charge, not me, not the guy that's over here bagging my groceries. He can't go out and just completely change the world. But the truth is, those things we kind of made them all up, right? And so they can be upended by a couple random events, and that, to me, I think scares the hell out of people, more than any kind of it was the mafia, it was this or that. So for me, sitting with that kind of really unsettling feeling is hard, but it's also what I think is more true, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I appreciate all of the work that you've done on this, all of the research. Chris, it has been so wonderful chatting with you today. Thank you so much for your time. And for those of you watching at home, be sure to pick up Regarding the Matter of Oswald's Body #1 in stores now. If you want to stay up to date on all of our amazing content, remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click that notification button.